The copper tang of blood flooded my mouth an instant before the realization hit me. I might die in this room tonight. The silence that fell over the grand ballroom wasn't the hush of polite society. It was the vacuum of air being sucked out of the room by a predator's arrival. My cheek throbbed with a heat that felt like a branding iron, pulsing in time with the frantic hammer of my heart against my ribs. 10 minutes earlier, my biggest problem had been the blistering ache in the arches of my feet and the suffocating smell of expensive lilies masking the scent of greed. I was Kamari, the invisible help, just another pair of hands in a crisp white uniform, balancing a silver tray of crystal flutes filled with vintage Pinot Noir. The gala was an ocean of tuxedos and silk gowns, a swirling vortex of Seoul's elite pretending to care about charity while trading secrets and stocks. I moved through them like a ghost, conditioned to be seen only when needed and forgotten immediately after. The air was thick, heavy with a cloying mixture of roasted duck, cigar smoke, and perfumes that cost more than my entire year's tuition. I was exhausted. My shift had started 12 hours ago, and the humidity of the crowded hall was making my hair frizzy at the nape of my neck. I just wanted to drop the tray, rip off these cheap flats, and sleep for a week. I maneuvered around a cluster of men laughing too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. That's when it happened. He was a VIP guest, a man whose name I didn't know, but whose entitlement wafted off him like a foul cologne. He spun around without looking, his arm flailing as he recounted some story with wild gestures. His elbow connected hard with my shoulder. Gravity took over. The tray tipped. The crystal flutes didn't just fall. They seemed to dance in the air for an agonizing second, before shattering against the polished marble floor. Dark red wine exploded outward, splashing across the hem of his pristine white dinner jacket and soaking into the front of my uniform. Ideally, this was an accident. In the real world, his world, it was an assault. "You stupid bitch." He roared. The sound tore through the ambient chatter like a gunshot. He didn't give me a chance to apologize. He didn't give me a chance to grab a napkin. His hand moved with a speed fueled by alcohol and rage. Crack. The sound of his palm connecting with my cheek echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The force of it whipped my head to the side, snapping my neck so hard I saw stars dancing in my peripheral vision. My skin caught fire. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed immediately by a dead, heavy silence. I didn't cry out. I didn't cower. Years of surviving on my own had taught me that showing weakness to a bully only invited a second strike. I slowly lifted my hand, my fingers trembling as they grazed the rapidly swelling skin of my cheek. I could feel the heat radiating off my face, a stark contrast to the cold dread settling in my stomach. "Look what you did to my suit." The man spat, stepping forward, his hand raising again. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'll have you fired. I'll have you blacklisted from every—" I didn't look at him. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on the double mahogany doors at the far end of the ballroom. They swung open, not with a bang, but with a smooth, terrifying inevitability. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees in a single heartbeat. Taehyun entered. He didn't walk, he glided, a shark cutting through dark water. He was dressed in a suit of midnight black, tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a face carved from marble and cruelty. He was the CEO of Noctfall Corp on paper, but everyone in this room knew the truth. He was the head of the faction that ran the underworld of this city. He was the monster under their beds. The crowd parted for him instantly. Men who ran banks stepped back. Women who married senators lowered their eyes. Taehyun didn't look at any of them. He didn't look at the shattered glass or the wine staining the floor. His obsidian eyes locked onto me. He saw the wine on my uniform. He saw the way my hand clutched my face. And then, he saw the man looming over me. Taehyun stopped 3 feet away. The scent of him hit me, clean rain, cedar, and the metallic tang of gun oil. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. His face was devoid of expression, a mask of beautiful indifference, but his eyes were burning with a cold blue flame. The guest, realizing who was standing there, suddenly looked very small. "Mr. Yoon, this help, she ruined my jacket. I was just teaching her a lesson in respect." Taehyun didn't speak. He moved his right hand slowly to the inside of his jacket. The movement was deliberate. It was a promise. When his hand emerged, the light from the crystal chandeliers caught the matte black finish of a semi-automatic pistol. Doll, guests' eyes bulged. A woman in the crowd stifled a scream. Taehyun didn't aim the gun immediately. He just held it, the weight of it comfortable in his grip, his finger resting alongside the trigger guard. He looked at the red mark on my brown skin, then back at the man's trembling hand. Welcome back, my dangerous dreamers. Before we see what Taehyun does next, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our dark romance family stretch across cities, countries, and time zones. Every click helps us keep unraveling these high-stakes stories together. So find your quiet place, dim the lights, and get ready. Let's begin. The click of the safety being disengaged was the loudest sound in the world. It was a crisp, mechanical snap that signaled the end of negotiations. You touched what belongs to me, Taehyun said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, resonant baritone that vibrated through the floorboards and settled deep in my bones. Wrong choice. He didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he raised the weapon and pistol-whipped the man across the face. The sound was sickening, wet and crunchy, the sound of cartilage giving way to steel. The guest crumpled to the floor, howling in agony, clutching a nose that was no longer straight. Blood sprayed across the white marble, mingling with the spilled wine. Taehyun didn't even look down at the writhing body. He stepped over him as if he were nothing more than a piece of trash on the sidewalk. He closed the distance between us, towering over me. Up close, his aura was suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was a deer caught in the headlights of a very beautiful, very lethal semi-truck. He holstered the gun with a smooth, practiced motion, then reached out. I flinched, my body anticipating another blow. His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something dark and possessive passing through them. He caught my chin in his hand. His fingers were long and elegant, his grip firm but not painful. His thumb brushed over the swelling on my cheek, the callus on his skin scraping gently against my bruised flesh. Look at me, Kamari, he commanded. It wasn't a request. I forced my eyes to meet his. The intensity of his gaze made my knees weak. He looked at me as if he wanted to consume me whole, to devise a way to keep me in a glass box where nothing could ever touch me again. Who told you to lower your eyes? He whispered, his voice rougher now. You do not look down, not when you are with me. I'm sorry, I stammered, my voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. I didn't mean to cause a scene. I'll clean it up. You will do no such thing. He released my chin and slid his arm around my waist. The contact burned through the thin fabric of my uniform. He pulled me flush against his hard chest, his grip iron tight. It wasn't a hug, it was a claim. He was branding me in front of the entire city. He turned to the room, his arm still clamped around me. The party is over. No one argued. No one moved. He swept me toward the exit, his stride long and purposeful. I had to half-jog to keep up with him, his arm the only thing keeping me upright. We left the stunned silence of the ballroom behind, the heavy mahogany doors closing with a thud that sealed my fate. We bypassed the main lobby, heading straight for the private elevators. The chrome doors slid open, and he marched me inside. As soon as the doors hissed shut, enclosing us in a mirrored box, the atmosphere shifted. The air became electric. He pressed the button for the penthouse garage, then turned to me. We were alone now. The facade of the calm businessman slipped, revealing the raw, dangerous energy beneath. He crowded me against the mirrored wall, his hands planting on either side of my head, trapping me. Do you know how close I came to putting a bullet in his skull? He murmured, leaning down until his lips were inches from my ear. I could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath now, mixed with that dark, spicy scent of power. Seeing his hand on you. I shivered, the cold metal of the elevator wall pressing against my back, the heat of his body radiating against my front. Taehyun, I was just working. It was an accident. Nothing is an accident, he growled, his hand moving from the wall to tangle into the hair at the nape of my neck. He tugged my head back, exposing my throat. You are mine, Kamari. I don't care if you're working. I don't care if the president of South Korea is standing there. No one touches you. The elevator dinged, signaling our arrival at the garage, but he didn't move. He stared at my mouth, his eyes dark with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. Let's get one thing clear, he said, his voice dropping to a seductive, dangerous whisper. From this moment on, you don't serve anyone but me. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded jarringly cheerful given the bide, violence radiating off the man standing next to me. The garage was a cavern of concrete and fluorescent light, smelling of gasoline and damp earth. But in the center of the emptiness sat a beast. A matte black Maybach, its chrome accents gleaming like bared teeth under the harsh overhead lights. Taehyun didn't shove me. He didn't drag me. He simply placed a hand on the small of my back, a touch that burned through the fabric of my uniform, guiding me with a pressure that left no room for argument. A driver in a dark suit scrambled out to open the rear door, bowing so low his nose nearly scraped the pavement. Taehyun ignored him. He ushered me into the back seat, the interior swallowing me whole. The smell hit me first. Rich, buttery leather that had never known a stain, mingled with that same crisp scent of cedar and rain that clung to Taehyun's skin. It was the smell of old money, the kind of money that could buy silence. I sank into the seat, the plush upholstery embracing me like a velvet trap. Taehyun slid in beside me. The door closed with a heavy, pressurized thud that sealed out the world. Then came the sound that made my blood run cold, the distinctive, metallic click of the locks engaging. I was trapped. The car began to move, gliding forward with a silence that was unnatural. The engine didn't roar, it hummed, a low, predatory vibration that I felt through the soles of my cheap, worn-out shoes. Rain had started to fall, drumming against the tinted windows, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon red and blue. I pressed my shoulder against the door, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and the man who had just nearly beaten a guest to death for me. My reflection in the darkened glass looked like a stranger. My hair was escaping its bun, my uniform was stained with wine that looked too much like dried blood, and the red handprint on my cheek was beginning to throb in earnest. "Why are you here, Kamari?" I asked myself, the panic rising in my throat like bile. "Why didn't you run when the elevator opened?" But I knew the answer. The answer was lying in a sterile white bed in Ward 4 of St. Peter's Hospital, hooked up to machines that beeped in a rhythm that cost $600 an hour. My father, the only family I had left. The stroke had taken his speech and his movement, but the hospital bills were taking my life. I looked at the leather armrest, at the stitching that probably cost more than my rent. This car, this single vehicle, was worth more than I would make in 10 lifetimes of serving wine to ungrateful snobs. The injustice of it choked me. I was drowning in $80,000 of student debt for a degree I couldn't use, because I was too busy working 3 jobs to pay for Dad's medication. And here sat Taehyun, draped in darkness and wealth, treating violence like a transaction. The silence in the car stretched, becoming a physical weight. It wasn't empty silence. It was heavy, pregnant with unsaid words. I could feel his eyes on me. I didn't need to look to know he was watching. I could feel his gaze tracing the profile of my face, lingering on the bruise, sliding down to the pulse jumping frantically in my throat. "Kamari Smith," he said softly. I jumped. My name sounded foreign in his mouth, too intimate. 24 years old, he continued, his voice calm, reciting facts as if reading from a grocery list. "Graduated top of your class in veterinary science, but you haven't sat for your licensing exams. You work at the Gilded Cage on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the library on weekends, and you cater private events whenever the agency calls." My breath hitched. I turned slowly to face him. He wasn't looking at me anymore, he was staring straight ahead, his profile sharp against the passing streetlights. "Current outstanding debt, $84,312, he murmured. "Father, Marcus Smith. Patient 309 at St. Peter's. Condition, critical. Prognosis, poor without the experimental treatment your insurance denied last week. The air left my lungs." The car suddenly felt very small, shrinking around me until I was gasping. "How?" My voice cracked. I tried again, stronger this time, though I was trembling. "How do you know that?" Taehyun shifted. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, the movement casual but deliberate. As he adjusted his cuff, the fabric of his shirt rode up just an inch. I saw it. Inked into the pale skin of his wrist, disappearing up his forearm, was the tail of a dragon. It wasn't the cartoonish art I saw on the bouncers at dive bars. This was intricate, masterful, and terrifying. The scales were detailed in black and gray, shading into a darkness that seemed to move with his muscle. The dragon. The mark of the Seance Syndicate. They weren't just a mafia family. They were the family. The shadow government that ran the ports, the casinos, and half the politicians in the city. And Tae-hyun wasn't just a member. You didn't wear a suit like that, drive a car like this, and command a room unless you were the head of the beast. He was the dragon. "I know everything, Kumari," he said, turning his head to look at me. The shadows inside the car made his eyes look completely black, like pools of oil. "Did you really think I intervened back there because I care about the integrity of your uniform?" He reached into the leather pocket on the back of the driver's seat and pulled out a slim black tablet. He tapped the screen once, the light illuminating his harsh features, and handed it to me. My hands shook as I took it. It wasn't a file on the rude guest. It was a file on me. The first photo was from 3 weeks ago. I was walking out of the hospital in the rain, no umbrella, crying. The second photo was from the library. I was asleep on a stack of books, my head resting on my arms. The third photo was me at the bus stop, shivering in a thin coat. He hadn't just looked me up tonight. He had been watching me. For weeks. "You've been stalking me," I whispered, horror washing over me. "Why?" "I'm nobody. I have nothing." "You have everything I want," he corrected, his voice dropping to a growl. He leaned closer, invading my space again. The scent of him, danger and desire, filled my nose. "I didn't save you because you were a waitress in distress, Kumari. I saved you because you are mine. I decided that 3 weeks ago when I saw you fighting with that billing nurse at the hospital. I saw the fire in you. I saw how much you were willing to bleed for the only person you love." He reached out, his finger tracing the line of my jaw, stopping at my chin to tilt my face up to his. "I waited," he confessed, his thumb brushing over my bottom lip. "I waited for the moment when you would be desperate enough to accept my help. When that fool slapped you tonight, he didn't just insult you. He tried to damage my property." "I am not property," I snapped, pulling back against the door, clutching the tablet like a shield. "You can't just claim people. Can't I?" A dark, humorless smile touched his lips. "I can pay your debt with the change in my pocket. I can move your father to a private suite with the best neurosurgeons in the world by making a single phone call. I can erase your struggle, Kumari. I can make the world bow to you." He leaned back, spreading his arms along the top of the seat, radiating pure, unadulterated power. "But everything comes with a price." The car began to slow down. We weren't going to the police station. We weren't going to my apartment. The gates outside the window were massive, wrought iron monstrosities topped with gold spikes, opening slowly to reveal a winding driveway leading up to a fortress of glass and stone. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Home," Tae-hyun answered. "Or, more accurately, your cage." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming. "You asked how I knew about your debts. The better question is, what are you willing to do to clear them? Because we have arrived, and the negotiation starts now." The elevator doors slid open, not into a hallway, but directly into a sprawling expanse of white marble and floor-to-ceiling glass. If the car had been a cage, this penthouse was a mausoleum, cold, silent, and terrifyingly beautiful. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that raised goose flesh on my arms instantly. It smelled of nothing. Absolutely nothing. No dust, no cooking, no life. Just the sterile, sharp scent of ozone and the faint, lingering trace of that cedar cologne Tae-hyun wore like armor. I stepped out, my cheap flats squeaking on the polished floor. The sound echoed, amplifying how utterly out of place I was. I looked down at myself. The red wine stain on my white uniform had dried into a crusty brownish-maroon splotch that looked violently like old blood. My hair was a frizzy mess, escaping the pins I'd shoved in hours ago. In my apartment, a fourth-floor walk-up where the radiator clanked like a dying engine and roaches scattered when you turned on the lights. I was just broke. Here, amidst the chrome statues and modern art that probably cost more than my father's life insurance policy, I felt filthy. I felt like a contamination. "Stop trembling," Taehyun said from behind me. His voice was closer than I expected. "Fear smells sour. It doesn't suit you." He walked past me, shedding his suit jacket. He tossed it onto a pristine white leather sofa without looking to see if it landed. He loosened his tie, the silk hissing as he pulled it free, and unbuttoned the top of his shirt. For a second, just a second, the mask of the invincible warlord slipped. His shoulders hunched slightly, and a barely audible exhale hissed through his teeth. "Follow me," he commanded, walking toward a set of double doors on the far side of the room. I followed. I didn't have a choice. We were 50 stories up. The only way down was the elevator he controlled or the window. His office was different from the living area. It was dark, paneled in rich mahogany that seemed to swallow the light. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking the Seoul skyline, a glittering grid of lights that looked beautiful from this height, hiding the grime and the struggle of the streets below where I lived. He moved to a crystal decanter on a sidebar, pouring a measure of amber liquid. I stood by the heavy oak door, hugging my arms around myself. I watched him. I watched the way he moved. He reached for the glass with his right hand, even though the bottle was closer to his left. When he shifted his weight to turn toward me, his breath hitched. It was microscopic, a tiny flare of nostrils, a momentary tightening of the jaw. But I saw it. He was guarding his left side. His posture was slightly asymmetrical, favoring his ribs. My training kicked in before my brain could stop it. I wasn't just a waitress. I was top of my class in veterinary anatomy. I knew how bodies moved when they were broken. I knew how predators hid their pain to avoid looking weak. "You're hurt," I said. The words were out before I could check them. Taehyun froze, the glass halfway to his lips. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Excuse me?" "Your left side," I said, my voice gaining a little strength from the familiarity of diagnosis. "You're not putting weight on your left leg when you pivot, and you're guarding your lower ribs. You're breathing shallowly to avoid expanding your diaphragm on that side. Did you break a rib, or is it a laceration?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Dae-hyun stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smirk curled the corner of his lip. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had just found a diamond in a pile of coal. "Observant," he murmured. He took a sip of the bourbon, the amber liquid coating his throat. "Most people are too busy looking at the gun or the money to notice the man holding them. You really are a vet, aren't you?" "Animals can't tell you where it hurts," I said quietly. "You have to watch how they move." "And what kind of animal am I, Kamari?" He set the glass down with a sharp clink and walked around the massive desk to stand in front of me. He didn't deny the injury. "Never mind, we both know the answer." He picked up a sleek black folder from his desk and tossed it toward me. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right at the edge. "Open it." I hesitated, then stepped forward. My fingers brushed the cool leather of the folder. I opened it. It wasn't a police report. It was a contract. Top of the page, in bold, legal font, marriage agreement. My heart slammed against my ribs. "What is this?" "I need a wife," Taehyun said, leaning back against his desk, crossing his arms over his chest. He winced slightly but hid it well. "Not a real one. I don't need love, and I certainly don't need the headache of a woman who thinks she has a say in my business. I need a shield." "A shield?" I looked up at him, bewildered. "You have guns. You have men. Why do you need me?" "Because my enemies expect me to marry for power," he explained, his voice turning cold and pragmatic. "They expect me to align with the Dragunov family or the Triads. If I do that, it starts a war. Everyone gets nervous. But if I marry a nobody..." He gestured vaguely at me, his eyes sweeping over my stained uniform. "A poor, innocent, struggling student with big doe eyes and a sick father. They will relax. They will think I have gone soft. They will think I am distracted by a pretty face." He pushed off the desk and stalked toward me, boxing me in. I need a lamb, Kamari. A lamb that looks weak enough to make the wolves lower their guard. But as you just proved with your little diagnosis, I need a lamb that is smart enough not to get eaten. I won't do it, I whispered, backing away until my heels hit the door. I'm not selling myself to you. You aren't selling your body, he corrected sharply. You are selling your name and your time. 6 months. You wear my ring. You live in my house. You attend events on my arm and look at me with adoration. In public, we are the fairy tale romance. In private, you stay out of my way. And if I say no, then you walk out that door, he said simply. You go back to your apartment. You go back to your 3 jobs. And tomorrow morning, when the doctors at St. Peter's discharge your father because his insurance claim was officially rejected an hour ago, you deal with it. My blood ran cold. They rejected it? An hour ago, he confirmed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. He held it up. It was a check. A cashier's check. I could see the zeros from here. It was enough to cover the surgery. It was enough to cover the recovery. It was enough to buy a house. Surgery is scheduled for 800 am tomorrow, Taehyun said, his voice dropping to a velvet whisper. He held the check out, just out of my reach. Or, he goes home to die in your living room. The choice is yours, Kamari. Freedom, or his life. Tears stung my eyes. It wasn't a choice. He knew it wasn't a choice. It was coercion wrapped in silk. I looked at the check, then at his face. He wasn't gloating. He was just waiting. He was a businessman closing a deal. I thought of my father's face, gray and drawn against the hospital pillows. I thought of the way he used to carry me on his shoulders before the sickness took him. I reached out. My hand trembled, but I didn't pull back. I took the check. Where do I sign? I asked, my voice hollow. Taehyun's eyes flashed with triumph. He pointed to the desk. Bottom line. Don't smudge the ink. I walked to the desk. I picked up the heavy gold fountain pen. It felt like lead in my hand. I signed my name. Kamari Smith. The letters looked shaky, like the signature of a ghost. Done, I whispered. Good. Taehyun took the paper, checked the signature, and slipped it into a drawer. He locked it. The sound of the lock clicking felt like the door of a prison cell slamming shut. He looked at me, his expression shifting. The business transaction was over. Now, the reality was setting in. He walked over to me, stopping so close his chest brushed mine. He reached up and pulled the pin from my hair, letting the dark curls fall around my face. One last thing, he said, his voice low and raspy. You said in private I stay out of your way, I stammered, panic rising again. You said you didn't want a real wife. I don't, he agreed, his eyes traveling down to my mouth. But my enemies are watching. The staff in this house are watching. If we are to be convincing, we cannot sleep in separate wings on the first night. He leaned down, his breath ghosting over my ear, sending a shiver violently down my spine. Your training starts tomorrow, little lamb. But tonight you sleep in my room. I woke up drowning in him. The first thing I registered wasn't the light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, or the headache throbbing behind my temples. It was the smell. The sheets were saturated with it, a heavy, intoxicating blend of cedarwood, dark musk, and the faint, metallic tang of the city rain that seemed to cling to his skin. I buried my face in the pillow for a second, inhaling deeply before memory slapped me awake. I shot up, heart hammering. The other side of the massive, king-sized bed was empty. The sheets were cool to the touch. He was gone. On the nightstand, next to a lamp that looked like a jagged piece of obsidian, lay a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored cardstock. The handwriting was sharp, angular, and aggressive. Be ready at 7 p.m. Do not leave the house. No good morning. No here is some breakfast. Just a command. I swung my legs out of bed, my toes curling against the freezing marble floor. The penthouse was even more intimidating in the daylight. I wandered through the rooms like a ghost haunting a museum. Everything was white, black, or chrome. There were no photos on the mantel, no books on the tables, no magnets on the fridge. It was a sterile cage designed for a predator who didn't want to leave a trace. I felt small. I felt like an intruder in my own life. Around noon, the intercom buzzed. A terrifyingly efficient team of staff, who refused to make eye contact with me, wheeled in a rack of clothing and stacked black boxes with gold lettering on the bed. When they left, I opened the first box. My breath hitched. It was filled with lace, lingerie, silk robes, stockings. I checked the tags. They were my exact size, not just small or medium, but the precise cup size, the precise waist measurement. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning ran down my spine. He hadn't just watched me. He had catalogued me. He knew the dimensions of my body better than I did. I opened the garment bag hanging on the rack. A gown of liquid emerald silk spilled out. It was breathtaking. It was worth more than my father's life. And I hated it. I ran my fingers over the silk. It felt slippery, cold. It felt like a shackle. If I put this on, I wasn't Kamari anymore. I was his doll. I was the lamb he had bought to fool the wolves. No, I whispered to the empty room. I shoved the dress back into the bag. I rummaged through the drawers until I found a plain, oversized white t-shirt, probably his, and pulled it on. It hung to my mid-thighs. I found a pair of leggings in one of the boxes, the only normal thing there, and pulled them on. I refused to wear the silk. I refused to wear the lace. By 6 p.m., my stomach was eating itself. I went to the kitchen, a stainless steel expanse that looked like an operating theater. I opened the fridge. Vodka, sparkling water, ice, a jar of olives. Rich people starve differently, I muttered, slamming the door. I rifled through the pantry. Nothing but protein powder and espresso beans. Finally, in the very back, behind a bottle of whiskey, I found a single packet of spicy instant ramen. It must have been left by a staff member. It was a miracle. I boiled the water. The smell of the cheap spicy powder filled the sterile kitchen, overpowering the scent of ozone. It smelled like my apartment. It smelled like survival. I was leaning against the counter, slurping the noodles straight from the pot because I couldn't find a bowl, when the front door beeped. Taehyun walked in. He stopped dead in the hallway. He was wearing a fresh suit, charcoal gray this time, the jacket unbuttoned. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed, but the moment he saw me and smelled the kitchen, his expression hardened into stone. He walked toward me, his stride eating up the distance. He looked at the pot in my hand. He looked at the orange broth stains on the counter. He looked at his oversized t-shirt hanging off my frame. "What?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Is that smell?" "Dinner," I said, putting the pot down with a defiant clatter. "Since you didn't leave any food in your museum." He looked at the noodles with genuine disgust, as if I were eating toxic waste. "I give you a platinum card with no limit. I give you access to the finest chefs in Seoul. And you are eating instant trash in my kitchen?" "I eat what I know," I snapped, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "I'm not going to order caviar just because you're paying for it. I'm not your doll, Taehyun. I'm not going to play dress-up and eat fancy food just to make you feel powerful." "You are my wife," he growled, stepping into my personal space. The air around him crackled with static electricity. "And my wife does not smell like sodium and poverty." "Well, your wife is hungry," I shot back, lifting my chin. "And she hates this house." His eyes flashed. A mixture of anger and something else. Amusement? Arousal? It was hard to tell with him. He looked at the t-shirt I was wearing. His t-shirt. "And the clothes?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "I had a wardrobe delivered." "Why are you wearing my shirt?" "Because the dress felt like a costume," I said, my voice trembling slightly as he crowded me against the marble counter. "I didn't want to wear it. You think you have a choice?" He reached out. His hand wrapped around the fabric of the t-shirt at my waist. His knuckles brushed the skin of my stomach, sending a jolt of heat straight to my core. He didn't pull me closer. He just held the fabric, testing its strength. "This," he sneered, looking at the cotton, "is unacceptable." "Reep." The sound was sharp and shocking. He didn't tear the shirt off me, but he ripped the hem, a violent, jagged tear that exposed my hip. I gasped, dropping the chopsticks. They clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the silence. "You are not Kamari the waitress anymore," he said, his face inches from mine. I could see the flecks of gold in his obsidian eyes. I could smell the bourbon on his breath. "You are Mrs. Yoon, and you will look the part." He released the fabric and stepped back, his gaze raking over me with a possessiveness that made my knees weak. "Go upstairs," he commanded. "Wash that smell off you. Put on the emerald dress. And the heels." I opened my mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't just anger. It was a warning. "Do not test me tonight, Kamari," he said, checking his watch, a platinum piece that glinted under the lights. "We are late." "Late for what?" I asked, clutching the torn fabric of my shirt. He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had seen all day. It was a smile full of teeth and violence. "Dinner," he said, "with the heads of the Dragunov Bratva and the Triad." He turned and walked toward the door, throwing the words over his shoulder like a grenade. "Wear the dress, little lamb. Tonight, I show you to the wolves." The silence of the penthouse was usually cold, but tonight, it vibrated. It hummed with a residual energy of violence we had dragged in through the front door like a dirty stray dog. Taehyun slammed the heavy door behind us, the sound echoing like a gunshot in a canyon. He didn't stop moving. He paced the length of the marble foyer, his breath coming in short, sharp hisses through his teeth. I stood by the door, my back pressed against the wood, trembling. My hands were still clutching the emerald silk of my dress, the dress that now had a splatter of microscopic red dots near the hem. 10 minutes ago we had been at the Onyx Room, surrounded by men who carved up cities like cakes. A lieutenant from the Dragunov family, a man with gold teeth and dead eyes, had reached out. He hadn't even grabbed me. He had just run a single calloused finger down my bare arm, whispering something vile about how fresh Taehyun's new pet looked. Taehyun hadn't yelled. He hadn't drawn a gun. He had simply grabbed the man's index finger and snapped it backward with a wet, sickening pop, all while maintaining eye contact with the Dragunov Dawn. "She is not for touching," Taehyun had said, his voice terrifyingly calm while the man screamed on the floor. "She is for looking, and you have looked enough." Now, safe in his fortress, the monster was pacing. "That was reckless," I whispered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "You started a war over a touch." "I ended a disrespect," he snarled, spinning around to face me. His eyes were wild, the pupils blown wide with adrenaline and pain. "If I let them touch you, they think I am weak. If I am weak, we are both dead by sunrise. Do you understand that, Kamari? Do you understand what I just did for you?" He winced, his hand flying to his left side, the injured ribs I had noticed yesterday. The movement was jerky, uncoordinated. He tried to rip his jacket off, but the movement caught his injury, and he let out a guttural groan, stumbling slightly against the console table. "Damn it," he hissed, his face draining of color. The vet in me overrode the hostage. I saw a creature in pain, and my body moved before my brain could calculate the danger. "Stop," I said, stepping away from the door. "You're tearing the muscle." I walked up to him. Up close, the smell was overwhelming, the metallic copper scent of other men's blood on his knuckles, the acrid smoke of Cuban cigars clinging to his hair, and beneath it all the sharp, salty tang of his own sweat. He froze as I approached, his breathing ragged. He looked at me like he wasn't sure if he should kiss me or kill me. "Let me," I commanded softly. He didn't argue. He let his arms drop. I reached out, my fingers brushing the lapels of his charcoal suit. My hands looked tiny against the breadth of his chest. I slid the jacket off his shoulders, moving slowly, mindful of his left side. He hissed as the fabric pulled away, but he let me take the weight of it. I tossed the jacket onto the floor. Next was the tie. I loosened the knot, my knuckles grazing the hollow of his throat. His pulse was hammering against my skin, thump, 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 a frantic rhythm that matched my own. "You're shaking," he murmured. He wasn't looking at my hands, he was staring at the top of my head. "I'm terrified," I admitted, moving to the buttons of his shirt. "You broke a man's bone like it was a dry twig, Taehyun, and now you're bleeding." I could see the stain spreading on the white shirt now, just above his ribs. He had popped a stitch, or worse, taken a hit I hadn't seen in the chaos. I undid the buttons. 1, 2, 3. The shirt fell open. I gasped. The bruise on his ribs was fresh, a nasty purple-black bloom that wrapped around his torso. But that wasn't what stole the air from my lungs. His torso was a tapestry of violence. The famous dragon tattoo coiled around his right arm and shoulder, fierce and beautiful, but it was fighting for space against the wreckage of his past. Across his chest and wrapping around to his back were scars. Burn scars. Thick, ropey keloids where the skin had melted and refused to heal smooth. They were old, shiny and pale against his tanned skin, a map of agony that looked like someone had poured molten lead over him years ago. I reached out, my hand hovering over the worst of it, a starburst of scarred tissue right over his heart. "Who did this?" I whispered. The horror in my voice was genuine. No accident caused this. This was torture. Taehyun looked down at the scars, his expression detaching, becoming distant and cold. "Everyone thinks I was born a prince of the underworld," he said, his voice hollow. "They think I inherited the throne. They forget that before you can rule the fire, you have to burn." He caught my wrist before I could touch the skin. His grip was iron-hard, stopping me inches from his chest. My father had enemies. When I was 10, they didn't just send a hitman. They firebombed the estate while we were sleeping. He looked into my eyes, and for the first time I saw the boy who had died in that fire so the monster could be born. I was trapped under a burning beam for 3 hours. I listened to my mother scream until she stopped. I listened to my father beg until he stopped. He pulled my hand closer, pressing my palm flat against the jagged scar tissue over his heart. It was hot, feverishly hot. I didn't survive because I was lucky, Kamari. I survived because the fire couldn't kill what was already dead inside. I crawled out of the ashes, and I swore that I would burn down the rest of the world to make sure no one could ever touch me again. My heart broke. It was a stupid, dangerous thing to do, but it cracked right down the middle. He wasn't just a villain. He was a survivor, just like me. Taehyun. The atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy, thick with a tension that was no longer about pain. It was about gravity. He was still holding my hand against his bare chest. I could feel the thud of his heart beneath the scars. He looked down at me, his eyes dropping to my lips, then back up to my eyes. The darkness in his gaze swirled, changing from cold detachment to a scorching, possessive hunger. He stepped forward, forcing me to step back. "You shouldn't look at me like that," he warned, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my arm. "Like what?" I breathed, my back hitting the cool plaster of the wall. "Like you want to heal me." He slammed his hands against the wall on either side of my head, caging me in. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating off his bare skin. The scent of bourbon and cedar was suffocating, dizzying. "I am not a wounded dog you can nurse back to health, Kamari," he whispered, tilting his head so his lips hovered just over the shell of my ear. "I am the fire that burned the house down. If you get too close, you won't fix me. You'll just turn to ash." "I'm not afraid of fire," I lied. My voice was breathless, betraying me. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. His gaze dropped to my mouth again. He wanted to kiss me. I could feel the desire rolling off him in waves. It was terrifying. It was electric. He leaned in. I closed my eyes, my lips parting slightly, anticipating the collision. I wanted it. God help me, I wanted the monster to devour me. His breath brushed my lips, and then he froze. A shudder went through his rigid body. He squeezed his eyes shut, a look of pure torture crossing his face, as if denying himself was more painful than the broken ribs. "No," he groaned, the word torn from his throat. He pushed himself off the wall violently, stumbling back as if I had burned him. "I want to ruin you," he said, his voice raw, staring at me with a mix of longing and self-loathing. "I want to take you apart until you don't remember your own name. And because you are the only clean thing in this entire city, I can't." He turned his back on me, grabbing a bottle of whiskey from the console table as he stormed toward the bedroom door. "Go to your room, Kamari," he commanded, not looking back. "Lock the door. And do not open it. Not even for me." He disappeared into the darkness of the hallway, leaving me standing alone in the foyer, shivering in my silk dress, my lips tingling with the ghost of a kiss that never happened. 3 days. That was how long it had been since Taehyun almost kissed me. That was how long it had been since he looked at me with that terrifying mixture of hunger and hatred, only to lock himself away in his study like a monk doing penance. The penthouse had turned into a frozen wasteland. We passed each other in the hallways like ghosts, the air between us crackling with static electricity that neither of us dared to touch. Tonight, however, the silence was different. Tonight, we were on stage. The Obsidian Crown auction wasn't listed on Google Maps. It took place in the bowels of a decommissioned opera house, accessed through a series of heavy steel doors that required biometric scans and an invitation that cost more than a small island. I stood at the railing of our private box, looking down at the sea of sharks below. I was wearing blood-red silk. The dress was a weapon, cut low in the back and high in the leg, designed to distract and disarm. Taehyun had chosen it. He hadn't said a word when I walked out of my room, but his eyes had darkened, tracing every inch of exposed skin before he turned away and buttoned his tuxedo jacket with aggressive precision. "Stand straight," Taehyun murmured beside me. He wasn't looking at me, he was scanning the crowd below, his gaze sharp and predatory. "Show them your throat. If you look down, they will think you are prey." "I am prey, aren't I?" I whispered, gripping the velvet railing until my knuckles turned white. "We're in a room full of arms dealers and human traffickers, Taehyun. I'm just the only one wearing diamonds." "You are not prey," he corrected, stepping closer until his arm brushed mine. The contact sent a jolt of heat through my cold skin. "You are with the dragon. That makes you untouchable." I looked at him. His profile was carved from granite, unyielding and beautiful. He smelled of cold air and that signature cedar scent that had haunted my dreams for the last 3 nights. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to hate how safe I felt standing next to a monster. But I couldn't. Below us, the auctioneer, a man with a frantic energy and a slick sheen of sweat, banged his gavel. "Lot 45. A crate of unrefined lithium from the mines of..." I tuned him out. The opulence was nauseating. Crystal chandeliers hung from the rotting ceiling of the opera house, casting a fractured light over men who destroyed nations for profit. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, their eyes fixed on the floor. It was a carnival of sins, and we were in the VIP box. "Mr. Yoon." The voice was oily, sliding through the air like sludge. Taehyun stiffened instantly. I felt his muscles coil tight, ready to strike. We turned. Standing in the entrance of our private box was a man who looked like he had been constructed out of stale dough and malice. Sergei Morozov. I knew the name from the dossiers Taehyun had made me memorize. He was the head of the Bratva's eastern expansion. He dealt in everything Taehyun refused to touch: drugs, flesh, misery. He was smiling, revealing a row of teeth capped in silver. He held a glass of vodka in one thick hand, his eyes raking over me with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. "Sergei," Taehyun said. His voice was flat, bored. I didn't know they let rats into the opera house. Morozov laughed, a wet, wheezing sound. "Always with the jokes, dragon. I see you brought your new acquisition." He stepped into the box, invading our space. He smelled of cheap peppermint and expensive vodka. He ignored Taehyun and walked straight toward me. "Mrs. Yoon," Morozov purred, stopping a foot away. Or should I say, "Miss Smith?" My heart stopped. The air left my lungs. How did he know my maiden name? The marriage license was sealed. The press releases only said Kamari. "You look expensive," Morozov continued, his gaze dropping to the diamond necklace resting on my collarbone. "Much better than you looked when you were scrubbing floors to pay for Daddy's medicine." "Leave," Taehyun said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command spoken with the absolute certainty of violence. He stepped between us, shielding me from Morozov's gaze. "Now." "Easy," Dragon Morozov sneered, holding up a hand. He reached into the inner pocket of his tacky plaid suit jacket. "I'm just here to collect on an old investment." He pulled out a piece of paper. It was yellowed, folded, and stained with coffee rings. He unfolded it with theatrical slowness. Marcus Smith Morozov read, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. A tragic figure. Loved the ponies. Loved the cards. Terrible at both. He held the paper up. It was a promissory note. A gambling debt. Your father borrowed $50,000 from my associates 3 years ago, Morozov said to me, peering around Taehyun's shoulder. He couldn't pay. So, he put up collateral. My stomach turned over. No, I whispered. He wouldn't. He did, Morozov grinned. He signed over his most valuable asset, his daughter. In the event of default, rights to the debtor's kin transfer to the creditor. The room spun. The shame was a physical blow, hitting me harder than the slap at the gala. My father. My gentle, sick father. He had gambled me away? He had bet my life on a horse race? Technically, Morozov said, stepping forward, his eyes locked on me with a sickening hunger. She belongs to me. I have the paper. I have the claim. You're driving a stolen car, Taehyun. Morozov reached out. His thick, hairy hand moved toward my arm. Come here, pet. Daddy's debt is due. I froze. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the horror of it. I was going to vomit. Taehyun moved faster than thought. One moment he was standing still. The next, his hand had shot out, intercepting Morozov's wrist just inches from my skin. The sound of the grip was audible. Meat impacting meat. Taehyun didn't twist. He didn't break the bone. He just held it, squeezing. You are mistaken, Taehyun said. His voice had dropped to a whisper, but in the small box it sounded like a landslide. I have the contract. Morozov spat, trying to yank his hand back. He couldn't. Taehyun's grip was a vice. I don't care about your paper, Taehyun said, his eyes burning with a blue-black fire that terrified me more than Morozov ever could. He pulled Morozov closer, until they were nose to nose. She is not collateral. She is my wife. And if you reach for her again, I will buy your entire organization just to burn it down. The threat hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the box. Morozov's eyes widened. He saw it then. He saw that this wasn't business. This wasn't about territory. This was a man protecting his heart, even if he didn't know it yet. Taehyun released Morozov's wrist with a shove that sent the Russian stumbling back. Taehyun reached into his tuxedo jacket. He didn't pull a gun. He pulled a checkbook. He uncapped a fountain pen, scribbled a number without looking, tore the check out, and crumpled it into a ball. He threw it at Morozov's feet. $5 million, Taehyun said coldly. For a $50,000 debt, that covers the principal, the interest, and the inconvenience of me having to breathe the same air as you for 2 minutes. Morozov looked at the crumpled paper on the floor. Greed warred with pride. Greed won. He bent down and snatched the check. A pleasure doing business, Morozov muttered, straightening his jacket, though his face was pale. He shot one last, lingering look at me. A look of regret, before turning and fleeing the box. We were alone again. I was shaking. I was shaking so hard the diamonds at my throat were trembling. Taehyun, I choked out. $5 million? You just gave him $5 million? Taehyun turned to me. The anger drained out of his face, replaced by a desperate, intense exhaustion. He reached out, his hands hovering over my shoulders, afraid to touch me, afraid to contaminate me with the violence he had just threatened. I would have given him everything, he confessed, his voice rough. I would have burned this whole building to the ground before I let him touch you. He stepped closer, finally closing the distance. His hands landed on my waist, pulling me into him. It wasn't the possessive grip of a master, it was the desperate clutch of a drowning man finding a life raft. He said my father sold me, I whispered, tears finally spilling over, hot and humiliating. He gambled me away. Your father was a fool, Taehyun said fiercely, tilting my chin up so I had to look at him. He didn't know what he had, he didn't know your worth. And what is my worth? I asked, searching his dark eyes. Taehyun looked at me, and for the first time the mask was gone completely. There was no dragon, there was no CEO, just a man who was terrified of losing the only light he had ever found. Incalculable, he whispered. And then, he didn't pull away. He didn't stop himself. He lowered his head and kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision. It was fire and desperation, and $5 million worth of obsession. His lips were hot, demanding, tasting of bourbon and rage. I didn't fight him. I melted into him, wrapping my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, realizing with a jolt of terrifying clarity that I didn't just owe him my life. I belonged to him. And for the first time, I wanted to. The morning sun hit the penthouse floor differently today. It wasn't cold. It wasn't sterile. It felt like gold dust. I woke up tangled in the sheets, my body heavy and aching in the best way possible. The space beside me was warm, but empty. I sat up, clutching the duvet to my chest, the scent of cedar and sex clinging to my skin. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about the rent. I wasn't worried about the hospital bills. I was just happy. The bathroom door opened. Taehyun walked out. He was fully dressed in a navy suit, crisp and sharp. But his face was different. The hard lines around his mouth had softened. The perpetual furrow between his brows was gone. He looked at me, and the heat in his eyes made my toes curl. He walked over to the bed, leaning down to press a kiss to my forehead. His lips lingered there, warm and firm. "I have a meeting with the board," he murmured, his hand cupping my cheek. "It will be boring. I will make it short." "Okay," I whispered, leaning into his touch. "When I come back," he said, pulling away slightly to look me in the eyes, "we need to talk. About the contract. About tearing it up." My heart soared. He was going to make this real. He was going to keep me. "I'll be here," I promised. He smiled, a genuine rare smile that transformed him from the dragon into a man, and left the room. I heard the heavy front door click shut moments later. I fell back onto the pillows, grinning at the ceiling. I was going to be Mrs. Yoon. For real. Buzz. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. I reached for it lazily, expecting a text from the hospital or maybe even Taehyun sending me something sweet. It was an unknown number. I opened the message. It wasn't a text. It was a video file. I pressed play. The blood drained from my face so fast I nearly fainted. The video was shaky, filmed from a doorway. It showed a hospital room. Ward 4. My father's room. He was sleeping, the heart monitor beeping steadily. But the camera panned down. At the base of the oxygen tank stood a man's hand holding a silver Zippo lighter. The thumb flicked the lid open. Click. The flame danced dangerously close to the explosive gas. The video ended. A text followed immediately. "Morozov, the dragon bought your debt, but he didn't buy your father's safety. If you are still in that penthouse in 1 hour, the hospital burns. If you tell Taehyun, the hospital burns. Come to the Motel 6 on the east side. Room 204. Alone, or Daddy dies screaming." I couldn't breathe. The room spun. The golden sunlight turned into a mocking glare. Morozov knew. He knew I would be safe with Taehyun, so he aimed at the only thing I couldn't protect. If I told Taehyun, he would go to war. He would burn the city down to get to Morozov. But in the time it took for Taehyun to mobilize his men, Morozov would light that match. My father would die. And Taehyun would die trying to avenge me. I looked at the empty side of the bed. I looked at the dent his head had left on the pillow. I had to leave. I had to break his heart so thoroughly that he wouldn't come looking for me. If he thought I was a victim, he would hunt for me. If he thought I was a traitor, he would let me go. I moved like a zombie. I dressed in my old jeans and a sweater. I packed nothing. I took nothing he had bought me. I walked to the marble vanity. I slipped the diamond engagement ring off my finger. It felt like I was ripping off a piece of my soul. I set it on the cold stone. I found a notepad. My hand shook so hard I could barely hold the pen. "Taehyun, the 5 million was generous. But I can't live in a cage, even a golden one. I took the rest of the cash from the safe. Don't look for me. The contract is void. It was fun, but I never loved you. Kumari, it was a lie. A poisonous, jagged lie designed to sever the tie between us." I left the note under the ring. I walked out of the penthouse. I didn't look back. If I looked back, I would stay. and everyone I loved would burn. Taehyun did not buy flowers. Flowers were impractical. They died. They were a waste of resources. But today, he held a bouquet of white peonies in his left hand. They were soft, unassuming, and resilient. They reminded him of her. He stepped off the elevator, the code to the penthouse already punched in. The meeting had been excruciating. He had spent 2 hours listening to shareholders drone on about profit margins, while his mind was entirely focused on the curve of Kumari's neck and the way she had whispered his name in the dark. He wanted to make her a queen. Not a fake queen for the public, but his queen. Kumari, he called out as the doors opened. Silence. It wasn't the peaceful silence of the morning. It was a hollow, echoing silence. The kind of silence that happens after a funeral. Kumari? He walked into the living room. The curtains were drawn. The air felt stale. He dropped the flowers on the kitchen island and walked toward the bedroom. A cold knot of dread began to tighten in his gut, right behind his healed ribs. He pushed the bedroom door open. The bed was made. The room was pristine. He walked to the vanity. He saw the glint of diamonds first. The ring. She had taken it off. He picked it up, the metal cold against his skin. Beneath it was the paper. He read it. Once. Twice. It was fun, but I never loved you. The world stopped. The axis of the earth shifted. The blood in his veins turned to ice, and then, instantly, into molten lava. She left. She took the money and left. After last night? After the way she had looked at him? No, he whispered. The words scraped his throat like broken glass. The pain hit him first, a physical blow to the chest that made him double over. But the pain was quickly consumed by the rage. The dragon woke up, and it was screaming. He roared. It was a primal animalistic sound that tore through the penthouse. He swept his arm across the vanity. Perfume bottles, brushes, and the heavy marble tray flew across the room, shattering against the far wall in an explosion of glass and scent. He didn't stop. He grabbed the heavy oak chair from the corner and hurled it through the floor-to-ceiling mirror. Crash. The glass rained down like diamonds, fracturing his reflection into 1,000 broken monsters. She lied. She played him. She was just another person who wanted his money. Liar. 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 He flipped the heavy mattress off the bed frame, searching for... What? A sign? A reason? There was nothing. Just the void she left behind. He stood in the center of the destruction, his chest heaving, his knuckles bleeding where he had punched the wall. The white peonies on the kitchen counter seemed to mock him from the other room. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't dial the police. He didn't dial the hospitals. He dialed the number that only 5 people in the world had. Boss? The voice on the other end was trembling. They could hear his breathing. She's gone, Taehyun said. His voice was dead, devoid of emotion, terrifyingly calm. Sir? Kumari. She ran. Taehyun walked to the window, looking down at the city that suddenly looked like a graveyard. Close the ports. Close the airport. Shut down the train stations. Boss, that will cost millions in bribes. I don't care. Taehyun screamed, his control snapping for a split second before returning to that deadly whisper. Tear this city apart, brick by brick. Check every camera. Check every taxi. He squeezed the phone until the screen cracked under his thumb. Find her. Drag her back here. And... if she resists... Taehyun looked at the engagement ring still clutched in his bleeding hand. If anyone is hiding her, Taehyun said, his eyes turning black, kill them. If anyone touches her, kill them slowly. Bring her to me, now. The Motel 6 didn't smell like cedar. It smelled of stale cigarettes, bleach, and despair. I sat on the edge of the sunken mattress in room 204. The curtains were yellowed and thin, letting in the gray light of the rainy afternoon. I had been here for 3 hours. I had texted the number Morozov gave me. I'm here. I left him. No reply. The silence was driving me mad. Every time a car door slammed outside, I jumped. I checked my phone every 30 seconds. No news from the hospital. That meant my dad was still safe. For now. But the doubt was creeping in like mold. Why hadn't Morozov come to get me? Why the silence? I stood up and paced the small room. My reflection in the grimy mirror looked pathetic. My eyes were red and swollen. I looked like a woman who had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Taehyun must hate me by now, I thought, a sob catching in my throat. He must have found the note. I imagined him reading it. I imagined the light going out of his eyes. It was better this way. He would hate me, but he would be alive. Buzz. My phone. I scrambled for it. Morozov. Good girl. But plans have changed. I don't want you at the motel. My men are outside. They will take you to the warehouse. My stomach dropped. Warehouse? Kamari, you said I just had to leave him. You said my debt was paid if I left. Morozov, the debt is paid when I say it is. You really thought I'd let a $5 million asset walk away? You're not a wife anymore, Kamari. You're leverage. I dropped the phone. I was trapped. I had walked right into the wolf's mouth to save the dragon, and now the wolf was going to eat us both. I ran to the door. I threw the deadbolt, my fingers fumbling. I chained it. I backed away, looking for a weapon. The lamp. I grabbed the heavy ceramic lamp from the bedside table. Outside, heavy tires crunched on the gravel. Not one car. 3. I heard doors opening. Heavy boots hitting the pavement. They weren't trying to be quiet. They were coming for me. Thud, thud, thud. A fist pounded on the flimsy motel door. Open up, Miss Smith, a rough voice called out. It wasn't Taehyun. It was a Russian accent. Don't make us kick it down. I backed into the corner, clutching the lamp, tears streaming down my face. Taehyun, I whispered, closing my eyes. I'm so sorry. The door handle rattled. Then, a heavy boot slammed against the wood near the lock. Splinters flew. They were coming in. And this time, there was no dragon to save me. The wood around the deadbolt didn't just crack. It exploded. Splinters showered the room like shrapnel as the door flew open, rebounding off the wall with a violence that shook the cheap motel mirror. I didn't scream. I didn't have the breath for it. I tightened my grip on the heavy ceramic lamp, my knuckles turning white, and swung with everything I had the moment the first shadow crossed the threshold. Crash. The base of the lamp connected with the side of a man's head. He grunted, stumbling back, blood spraying from his ear. But he was just the meat shield. 2 more men surged in behind him, moving with the coordinated efficiency of a pack of wolves. Get off me. I shrieked, kicking out blindly. My foot connected with a knee, but a heavy hand clamped over my mouth, stifling my scream into a muffled whimper. The smell of wet wool and stale tobacco filled my nose, suffocating me. Another hand grabbed my hair, yanking my head back so hard I saw stars. I dropped the shattered remains of the lamp. They slammed me against the wall, pinning my arms. Boss wants her awake. The man holding me grunted. He leaned close, his breath hot and sour on my face. Stop fighting, little girl. You're already sold. They dragged me out into the rain. The gravel bit into my heels as my shoes were lost in the scuffle. I twisted, I bit, I clawed, but it was like fighting a tide. They shoved me into the back of a black cargo van. The metal floor was cold and slick. Before I could scramble up, a hood was shoved over my head, plunging me into a world of suffocating darkness. The door slammed shut, sealing my fate. Time lost its meaning in the dark. It could have been minutes or hours before the hood was ripped off, tearing at my hair. I gasped, blinking against the harsh glare of a single overhead halogen light. The air was freezing, biting through my thin sweater. I was seated in a metal chair, my wrists zip-tied painfully behind my back. The room smelled of rust, sea salt, and old blood. A warehouse on the docks. Welcome to the VIP suite. Sergei Morozov stepped into the circle of light. He wasn't wearing his plaid suit anymore. He was in shirt sleeves, rolling them up to reveal thick, hairy forearms. He held a phone in one hand and a heavy, leather-wrapped baton in the other. You led him on a nice chase, Morozov said, circling me. Leaving that note? I never loved you? Brutal. I almost cried myself. Let my father go, I rasped, my throat raw. I did what you asked. I left him. And that was very obedient of you. Morozov smiled. stopping in front of me. But obedience is boring. I need leverage. I need the dragon to come here, so I can cut his head off. He raised the phone, tapping the screen to start recording. Smile, Kumari. Tell your husband how much you miss him. I turned my head away. Go to hell. Morozov sighed. Wrong answer. The baton moved too fast to track. It struck my cheekbone with a sickening crack. Pain exploded in my skull, blinding and white-hot. My head whipped to the side, and I tasted the copper tang of blood filling my mouth. I slumped forward, gasping, tears involuntarily springing to my eyes. Look at the camera. Morozov roared, grabbing my chin and forcing my face up. Tell him, scream for him. I looked into the lens, blood dripping from my split lip onto my sweater. I saw my own reflection in the glass, battered, broken, terrified. But I didn't beg. Don't come, I whispered, staring straight into the camera eye. Taehyun, don't come. It's a trap. Morozov snarled and ended the recording. He'll come. Men like him, they can't resist a damsel in distress. The speedometer on the Maybach read 140 miles per hour. Taehyun didn't feel the speed. He didn't feel the G-force pressing him into the leather seat as he drifted around the corner, clipping a streetlight. He felt nothing but a cold, absolute void where his heart used to be. His phone was mounted on the dashboard. The video played on a loop. Crack. The baton hitting her face. The way her head snapped back. The blood. And then her voice. Don't come. It's a trap. She was trying to save him. Even after she left him. Even after she wrote that damning note, she was trying to save him. She hadn't left because she didn't love him. She had left because she was protecting him. The realization hit him harder than the bullet he took 3 years ago. She loved him, and she was bleeding because of it. Trap, Taehyun whispered, his hands tightening on the steering wheel until the leather groaned. Let it be a trap. The GP's tracker on the dashboard beeped rapidly. The signal from the metadata in the video file had pinged a warehouse in the Eastern Shipping District. Warehouse 4B. He saw it looming ahead, a massive corrugated metal structure surrounded by chain-link fences. 2 guards stood at the gate with rifles. Taehyun didn't touch the brakes. He floored the accelerator. The Maybach's engine roared, a mechanical scream of fury. The car turned into a missile. The guards dove out of the way just as the 2-ton vehicle smashed through the chain-link gate like it was made of paper. Taehyun didn't aim for the door. He aimed for the wall. He braced himself. Crash. The world dissolved into noise and dust. Metal screamed against metal. Bricks exploded. The front of the Maybach crumpled, the airbags detonating in his face with a puff of white powder. Taehyun punched the airbag aside before the dust even settled. He kicked the driver's side door open. It fell off its hinges. He stepped out of the wreckage. He wasn't Taehyun Yoon, the CEO. He was the dragon. And he was hungry. The explosion threw Morozov to the ground. I screamed as debris rained down from the ceiling. A massive cloud of dust and brick dust rolled over us, choking the air. The entire west wall of the warehouse was gone. In its place sat the mangled ruin of a black car, its headlights still cutting through the gloom like demon eyes. A silhouette stepped out of the smoke. He moved with a terrifying, unnatural stillness. He held a silver pistol in each hand. Kill him. Morozov shrieked, scrambling backward on his hands and knees. Kill him now. 4 men emerged from the shadows, raising their assault rifles. Taehyun didn't take cover. He walked forward. The first gunshot was his. A single, clean shot that took the nearest guard in the throat. The man dropped without a sound. The air erupted with gunfire. Bullets sparked off the metal pillars, chewed up the concrete floor, and whizzed past Taehyun's head. He didn't flinch. He moved like water, sliding into the cover of a forklift, popping out to fire 2 shots. Bang, bang, and 2 more men fell. He was closing the distance. He wasn't running, he was advancing. A man charged him with a knife. Taehyun holstered his left gun in a smooth motion, caught the man's wrist, and twisted. The snap of the bone echoed even over the ringing in my ears. Taehyun spun the man around, using him as a shield against the remaining shooters, then drove the man's own knife into his chest. He shoved the body away and fired over it. Headshot. Headshot. It wasn't a fight. It was an extermination. The warehouse went silent, save for the hiss of steam from the wrecked car and the drip of blood. Taehyun stood amidst the carnage. His suit was torn. His face was streaked with soot and blood, none of it his. He looked like a god of war carved from marble and nightmare. He scanned the room. His eyes landed on me. The demon vanished. The man returned. "Kamari," he breathed. He holstered his weapon and ran to me. He fell to his knees on the dirty packed concrete, ignoring the glass and debris. I flinched, pulling back against the chair, the memory of his rage when he found the note still fresh in my mind. Taehyun, the note, I had to. I stammered, tears blurring my vision. Shh. He silenced me, but not with anger. His hands, shaking violently, hovered over my face, afraid to touch the bruise Morozov had left. I know. I saw the video. I know you tried to save me. He pulled a knife from his boot and sliced the zip ties binding my wrists. My arms fell forward, numb and aching. Before I could move, he pulled me into his chest. He buried his face in my neck, gripping me so tight it hurt, but it was the best pain I had ever felt. He was shaking. The dragon was shaking. I found you, he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. I thought I lost you. I thought... God, Kamari. I'm sorry, I sobbed, clutching the ruined fabric of his suit. He has my dad. He threatened to burn the hospital. Your father is safe, Taehyun whispered into my hair. I sent a team to the hospital the second I saw the video. They secured him 10 minutes ago. Morozov has nothing. Relief washed over me so powerful it made me dizzy. I slumped against him, safe. Finally, safe. It's over, Taehyun murmured, pulling back to look at my face. His thumb gently grazed my split lip, his eyes dark with a mixture of adoration and murderous promise. I'm going to take you home. Click. The sound of a hammer cocking back was unmistakable in the silence. Taehyun froze. His eyes widened slightly, shifting focus to something over my shoulder. I turned. Morozov hadn't run. He had crawled out from behind a stack of crates. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his clothes covered in dust, but the gun in his hand was steady, and it was aimed directly at Taehyun's back. Home? Morozov wheezed, spitting blood onto the floor. The only place you're going is the morgue. He tightened his finger on the trigger. The click of the hammer locking back echoed through the cavernous ruin of the warehouse, louder than the screaming sirens of the fire alarm, louder than the blood pounding in my ears. It was the sound of the end. Taehyun didn't flinch. He didn't turn to face the bullet. He didn't beg. Instead, he did the only thing that mattered to him in that split second of eternity. He tightened his arms around me. He pulled me flush against his chest, shielding my body with his own, turning his broad back into a target to ensure that whatever metal tore through the air would hit him first. Close your eyes, Kamari, he whispered against my ear. His voice wasn't afraid. It was achingly tender, a final lullaby in the center of hell. Don't look. He was going to die. He was going to let Sergei Morozov put a bullet in his spine to buy me a few more seconds of life. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was a cold, clinical rage that sharpened my vision into pinpoint focus. I had spent my life fixing things, stitching up stray dogs, mending broken wings, fighting death in sterile rooms with beeping machines. I knew what death looked like, and I refused to let it take him. Not today. Not after he drove a car through a wall for me. I didn't close my eyes. I opened them wider. Over Taehyun's shoulder, through the haze of dust and smoke, I saw Morozov. He was swaying slightly, grinning through his blood-stained teeth, his finger tightening on the trigger. He was savoring the moment. He was waiting for Taehyun to scream. That was his mistake. He was looking at Taehyun. He wasn't looking at me. And he certainly wasn't looking at the black Sig Sauer pistol lying on the concrete 3 feet to my right, the weapon dropped by the first guard Taehyun had killed. No, I hissed. I didn't shove Taehyun away, I used him as a fulcrum. I threw my weight to the side, lunging out from the circle of his arms. Taehyun shouted my name, his hands grasping for me, thinking I was exposing myself to the line of fire. I was. I hit the concrete hard, my knees scraping against glass shards, but my hand closed around the grip of the discarded pistol. It was heavier than I expected. Cold, greasy with oil. Morozov's eyes snapped to me. His grin faltered. He swung his gun away from Taehyun's back, tracking me. He was too slow. I didn't aim for his head. The skull is hard, a glancing blow. I didn't aim for his chest. He could be wearing Kevlar. I aimed for what I knew. I aimed for the anatomy I had memorized in textbooks and surgery rotations. The femoral triangle. The massive highway of blood running down the inner thigh. Sever that, and a man bleeds out in 3 minutes. No vest covers it. No bone protects it. I squeezed the trigger. The recoil kicked up my arm like a live wire, jarring my shoulder. But the deafening crack was followed instantly by a wet, sickening thud. Morozov screamed. It was a high, thin sound of absolute shock. He buckled. His right leg gave way as a geyser of bright arterial red sprayed across the gray dust of the floor. He collapsed sideways, clutching his thigh, his gun skittering out of his hand and sliding under a pallet. My leg. You bitch. You shot my leg. He howled, writhing in the dirt, trying to stem the flow with hands that were already slick with his own life. I sat there on the floor, breathing hard, the smoking gun still clutched in my trembling hands. The smell of burnt gunpowder stung my nose, mixing with the metallic reek of blood. I stared at him. I had done that. I had broken him. Kumari. Taehyun was on me in an instant. He wasn't looking at Morozov. He was patting me down frantically, his hands flying over my arms, my chest, my face. Did he hit you? Are you hit? He demanded, his voice bordering on hysteria. I missed the bone, I whispered, my voice shaking. I aimed for the artery. Taehyun stopped. He looked at the gun in my hand. Then he looked at Morozov, who was rapidly paling, the pool of red widening beneath him. Taehyun looked back at me, and the expression on his face wasn't horror. It was awe. It was a worshipful, terrifying adoration. You shot him, he murmured, as if he couldn't quite believe it. He was going to kill you, I said, the tears finally starting to spill over. I couldn't let him take you. Taehyun let out a shuddering breath. He reached out and gently, so gently, pried the gun from my fingers. He set it aside. You saved me, he said softly. Then, the softness vanished. He stood up. The dragon returned, but this time, it was cold, calculated. He walked over to where Morozov was gasping for air, his skin turning the color of ash. Help. Me. Morozov gurgled, reaching a bloody hand toward Taehyun. Deal. Make a deal. Taehyun looked down at him with zero pity. He looked at the man like he was a stain on the floor. You touched my wife, Taehyun said. His voice was devoid of humanity. You threatened her father. And you tried to make her watch me die. Taehyun reached into his own jacket and pulled out his spare pistol. Kumari, Taehyun called out, not looking away from Morozov. Turn around. Taehyun, no. I started to say, scrambling to my feet. Turn around. He commanded, his voice cracking with intensity. You wound him to save a life. That is your nature. You are a healer. But I am the killer. Do not let his death be on your soul. Give it to me. I understood. He was taking the sin. He wanted to keep my hands clean, even though I was already covered in dust and grime. He was protecting my conscience. I turned my back. I pressed my hands over my ears. Bang. Bang. 2 shots. Controlled. Final. The wet gurgling stopped. The screaming stopped. The silence that rushed back into the warehouse was heavy, broken only by the groan of the metal roof beams twisting in the heat of the fire that had started near the wrecked car. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned. Taehyun holstered his gun. He looked tired. He looked battered. But he was alive. He didn't say a word. He scooped me up into his arms, lifting me effortlessly against his chest. I buried my face in his torn suit, inhaling the scent of him, smoke, sweat, and survival. We have to go, he said, stepping over the debris. The roof is coming down. He carried me out through the hole he had made in the wall. We emerged into the cool, gray afternoon. The rain was falling harder now, a deluge that hissed against the burning wreckage of the warehouse behind us. It felt like a baptism. It washed the dust from our skin and cooled the heat of the fire. Taehyun walked until we were clear of the smoke, near the tree line where the sirens were just starting to wail in the distance. He set me down on the hood of one of the black SUVs his men had just pulled up in. He stood between my legs, his hands framing my face, his thumbs wiping away the soot and the tears. He looked at me with an intensity that burned hotter than the fire we had just left. "I thought I had lost you," he whispered, his forehead resting against mine. "When I saw that empty room, when I read that note, I lied," I cried, gripping his lapels. Every word was a lie. "I didn't want the money. I just wanted you to live." "I know," he breathed. "I know." He kissed me then. It wasn't the desperate, angry kiss of the auction. It wasn't the tentative, almost kiss of the penthouse. It was a seal. It was a promise written in blood and gunpowder. It tasted of rain and forever. "You saved me," he murmured against my lips. I looked at him, at the scars I knew were under his shirt, and the new bruises forming on his face. I thought of the gun in my hand and the choice I had made. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I wasn't just a victim. I was the dragon's wife. "We saved each other," I whispered back. Taehyun smiled, a real, weary, beautiful smile. He kissed my forehead, then turned to the driver of the SUV. "Take us home," he ordered, "and call the best neurosurgeon in the country. My father-in-law is getting that surgery today." He climbed into the car, pulling me into his lap, refusing to let go of me even for a second. As the car pulled away, leaving the burning warehouse and the dead ghosts of our past behind, I rested my head on his chest and listened to the steady, strong beat of his heart. It was the only sound I ever wanted to hear again. 6 months later, the penthouse doesn't smell like sterile ozone anymore. It smells of lavender, fresh espresso, and life. A chunky, cream-colored knit blanket is thrown carelessly over the once pristine white leather sofa, and the cold glass shelves are now cluttered with trailing ivy plants and framed photos. On the wall of the study, hanging right next to Taehyun's intimidating accolades, is my new veterinary license. Dr. Kamari Yoon. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window watching the scene on the balcony. My father, leaning on a cane but standing taller than he had in years, was laughing. Beside him, Taehyun was smiling, a real, unguarded smile that reached his eyes as he poured tea. The man who terrified the entire criminal underworld had spent the last 6 months ensuring my father had the best physical therapy money could buy. Taehyun sensed me watching. He always did. He said something to my father, then stepped inside, sliding the glass door shut. He crossed the room to me, his movement predatory and graceful. He still wore his darkness like a second skin. I knew he had dismantled a rival syndicate this morning before breakfast. But when he reached me, his touch was nothing but reverence. He slid his arms around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. His large, warm hands rested flat over my stomach, his thumbs brushing the silk of my dress. "He's kicking," Taehyun whispered against the curve of my neck, his voice thick with awe. "She," I corrected, smiling as I leaned my head back against his shoulder. "I have a feeling it's a girl. Then God help this city," he chuckled darkly, his lips grazing my ear. "A mini version of you? I'll have to burn the world down twice, just to keep the boys away." I looked at our reflection in the darkened glass. 6 months ago, I was a waitress trembling over spilled wine, terrified of the monster in the black suit. I thought I was a victim. I thought I was a pawn. But as I covered his hands with mine, feeling the strong, steady beat of the life we created, I realized the truth. I wasn't the lamb he had bought to fool the wolves anymore. I turned in his arms, looking up at the dragon who would destroy nations just to see me smile. "Long live the queen," I whispered.